Hello, everyone. Good evening. You're welcome to another episode of Early Intervention Matters podcast. This is a platform that hosts different topics relating to neurodiversity, and we have had several guests on the panel, including professionals, parents, and people who have expert experience in different aspects of neurodiversity. So I'm really pleased today to have a wonderful guest, Diana Fannon, who is going to tell us a bit more about herself. And Diana is in the US, and we we share a lot of common themes around neurodiversity. So it's always good when I have guests from the US to see that we're facing similar challenges. So actually the advice and the recommendations are applicable on both sides. It's just different systems. So, Dana, thank you so much for coming on the podcast session.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. And yeah, as you mentioned, we have a lot of similarities in what we do and kind of who we work with.
Yeah, thank you. So, Dana, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I'm coming up on, I think it's almost my 25th year of working in education. And of that, I've spent 20 years working exclusively with students with disabilities. And I started as a teacher, but I very quickly moved. I kind of realized that wasn't my calling. So I became a school psychologist. And then that's where my career working with students with disabilities started. And I I didn't realize it at the time, but I have epilepsy, so it was sort of connecting, I think, my own lived experience with being able to help others who have similar experiences and really being able to help their families. So I worked as a school psychologist, and then I supervised school psychologists, and then I worked in dispute resolution for a little bit for a large school district in Los Angeles. And then I was a director of special education, and that was probably where I learned the most because sort of being in, I think what we would call middle management, where a lot of
Mm,
people think you have the power, but you really don't. But I did get the best thing to come out of that was getting to know families. And I had worked with families for many, many years before that. But being in that particular position is when you really hear from families
yeah.
their struggles and what's going well and what's not going well. And the question you get a lot when you work in schools is, well, do you have children? And I didn't for most of
Mm,
that time, but I think I was always the same person. I was always really compassionate and really just connected with the human side. But then I did have a child, and he is autistic. And so I think that I always tell the parents that I've met along the way that they really were preparing me for the thing
yeah.
you didn't know was coming, which was parenting my child with autism. So
Mm,
that's where I am today. And I now have my own business, and I work to provide training materials and education for parents and to advocate for them and for their children as well. But I do think that the best thing that I can do and the best thing that a parent can do is to learn as much as possible,
mm,
not to add another thing to their plate, but the more that you know, the more empowered you are and the more confident you are that you don't have to take what somebody tells you at face value, the better off you'll be and the better off your child will be. So that's the very short version of what I've been doing for the last 25 years.
thank you. That's really interesting career journey. And like you said, you've weaved everything into it, your own lived experience, your
Yeah.
career as a teacher, then, director for special educational needs. And so all that is really rich experience
Yeah.
that's helped you. Did you find that when you were teaching, did you think your knowledge on, neurodiversity and special educational needs was up to what you needed to identify and support children?
So it's interesting because I would say that that was 25 years ago. And so I think that it was helpful, but I don't think I knew as much then as if I were to be a teacher now, I think it would be a whole different world. But back then, I was a much better supporter of children's social emotional states and their mental health and building relationships with kids. I was great with kids, but teaching was not necessarily my strong suit.
Mm,
So I think I did a really good job. But the reason I went into school psychology was because I found my passion elsewhere. I have seen really good teachers and I have mentored really good teachers. And I know that that wasn't where I was meant to be. So it's hard for me to speak on that. I think that my knowledge of sort of living with a disability and understanding mental health challenges allowed me to be really compassionate, and
Mm,
I think that was what I always had in me, and working with families, I did that from day one. I was really good at working with families, really good at coaching parents, and so it's hard for me to look back and say that as a 23-year-old kid who was teaching.
mm,
It was just different. So I think I understand. It really helped me to understand what teaching is and all
mm,
of the different hats you have to wear and all of the different, like, it gave me empathy and sympathy, honestly, sometimes for
mm,
the teachers so that when I'm training them and when I'm supporting them, I really do understand what it is to be in the
yeah,
classroom. And I left too, right? So I understand that too. I understand the burnout
yeah,
and I understand the workload. So I think it gave me a way to understand everything about the classroom experience. So I think it was helpful for a number of reasons. But I also left. So it wasn't necessarily my place.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what attracted me to when I saw your profile. I was quite attracted to that because I said, yes, this is somebody who's been a teacher, who's actually walked the journey, and also to see the work you're doing actually in empowering parents,
Yeah.
because that's one of the I find that a lot of families are in limbo really. When they come to the clinic, they're just at a loss. There's like no, they don't know what's happening to their child, they don't know what their child is getting, what support, what assessments. They have no clue. So they're just in the dark. And sometimes they really don't know how to move forward. So I do feel sorry for them when they come into the clinic because from the clinical point of view, there's very little we can do in terms of knowing what's happening
With the
at
school.
school except when whatever the teachers tell us.
Yeah.
So I felt that this was great work you were doing in actually empowering parents about how to navigate that process.
And I think that's one of the things, simply finding a way to communicate and simply finding a way to understand what's happening at school, because it's scary sometimes if you think about it, that you drop your
Mm,
child off at school and then you pick them up, and it can be really scary, especially if your child isn't able to communicate with you as well as another child might be able to, right? When they come home,
mm,
how was your day? If they're using a device to communicate, or if they're non-speaker, or even if they just don't have a reliable way of communicating at all yet, it's even scarier than any other parent leaving a child at school. So really understanding, are they getting services? Are they not getting services? Is someone actually picking them up? Are they doing what they say they're going to do? It's terrifying
it
to
is.
think about that. And I think one of the things that really can help parents is knowing, what questions do you ask? What are you entitled to ask? How do
Mm,
you do it? Right. Simply for parents, sometimes even just telling them put everything in writing is a really easy way to change things. And it
yeah.
seems obvious to me, but I've learned I live in that world. So the things that
Mm,
are obvious to me are they're never a given to somebody else, you know?
mm,
So that is telling parents what their rights are. I have learned
mm,
it's a really simple thing to do, but it really makes parents feel like, oh, there are things that I can ask for, and there are things
yeah.
they have to do for me and for my child. And so I really love doing that.
That's great. So what when you see parents or you work with them, what worries do you commonly hear from them? What's usually their experience?
So I think a lot of times it is first of all, it's about, they'll hear about money. The schools will communicate that we don't have money for this, and so we're not able to do that. So I think they get scared that their child's services will be cut because the school doesn't have enough money or because the school doesn't have enough staff. And this is now not just in the US, even this is everywhere right now. I've heard
Everywhere.
the UK.
It's ringing the same bell for me. Yeah.
Yes, it's happening across, I mean,
Yeah.
internationally, right? So I think particularly in the US, and I don't know the laws as well outside of the US, but I think the important thing for parents to know is that the rights don't change even if there's no money. So there are certain laws that entitle parents to services for their child, even if the school doesn't have money. The rights, or in the US, we have IEPs, so in individualized education programs. And I know everyone has some version of that, depending, regardless of what country you're in. But a child is entitled to whatever is in that education plan, and the laws protect them, even if the school doesn't have staff, even if the
Mm,
school or the district is losing funding. So I
mm,
think that is helpful for parents to know that. Now, there might have to be a little bit of a fight to make sure the school's reminded of that,
mm,
but that's one of the biggest fears. And then
mm,
along those same lines, staffing, right? So not just about budget, but the schools lose staff or they can't find somebody to provide services. And
mm,
similarly, if they're not providing the services, the child is entitled to what we call compensatory services, or to make up those services. So really, it's all about making sure the child is getting what they're legally entitled to. So those are the biggest fears, that their child isn't getting what they're supposed to be getting, I think.
mm.
And what do I do? How do I make sure that my child's getting what they're supposed to be getting? I think it's all about that. And then there are some other things um, that aren't maybe as common, but are certainly much worse, like bullying, whether the school is following up on bullying or whether they're trying to brush it under the rug.
Yeah.
And those are scary and heartbreaking and involve a lot of the same things, which is just constant communication with the school and making sure that they're taking it seriously. And it's not always taken as seriously as it should be.
I must say that that's one of common thing I do see in the clinic. And sometimes a child will say that they've reported the child is obviously anxious or scared or worried about going to school, and you delve into that, they're bullied. And when you ask them whether the school, the teacher knows about it, they said, well, they know about it, but they haven't really done anything. So that's that's something that comes up over and over. How seriously has this been dealt with? Because that impacts on the child and
Yeah.
the family as well.
Yes. And I think one of the common responses I find, which is so hard on the parents, is that they'll kind of respond in a way that makes the parents start to doubt themselves too, right? They'll say, well, it wasn't your child, it was the other child, right? And they'll start to kind of just not only minimize it, but completely contradict the story that the parent has received. And so then it ends up feeling bad for everybody.
Yeah,
So it's not,
yeah, that's definitely one common thing I
yeah,
do. So yes, you've talked about very important for them to know their rights. And where do you direct them to when,
to know their rights.
yeah, to know their rights?
So in the US, the most helpful place to do that is the state Department of Education. So every state Department of Education. So if you're in California, the California Department of Education, New York, the New York Department of Education, every single state has a Department of Education that will have what we call your rights and procedural safeguards, the parent rights and procedural safeguards. And what that does is it goes through exactly what you're entitled to as a parent. And typically, what that means is that you can, when it comes to special education or the individualized education program, the IEP, you can agree or disagree. And if you disagree, you have the right to file a complaint or to go to due process, like all those different options. But sometimes parents don't know, and every state's a little bit different. Some states require a parent to agree to the IEP for it to go into effect. Some states don't. So every state's a little bit different about how you agree to things. But those rights and procedural safeguards are really important for parents to review because you get them at every single meeting you go to. So some parents kind of laugh it off because you've gotten so many copies of them at every meeting you go to, but they
Mm,
really are, they do outline everything. And then if you're getting stuck, it can be helpful to have an advocate or somebody attending with you. The problem there is it can get expensive, but there are some free options in the States where you can go to like your parent training and information center. There's usually at least one in every state. But, there are different options. Again, most advocates like me will offer you a free consult, right? You can go to somebody for a free session to talk and then figure out a way to get support, And I think it's just figuring out what your best option is. And at the very least, bring somebody with you, right? Like even when I had
Mhm.
my own son's IEP meeting, I brought somebody with me. So it's because when
Yeah,
you're a parent, it's really challenging to separate. Like I can go with someone else and not be emotional, but when it's my own kid, it's really hard, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it
Oh,
can be. And
yeah.
I know when you're taking in so much of, sometimes it's really one because parents can say in a meeting and there's a lot of information coming at them
Yes.
and they're already overwhelmed with so many things. So, yeah, so just for our audience, one of the key things, as Dana has said, is write things down because I think it's really good for families to write things down
Yes.
because the anxiety of being in a place, in a meeting, and relying on your rote memory to remember everything, sometimes it's very difficult. And the second thing that you said is the information to know their rights, being able to
Yes.
go to the right section for that as well, and bring somebody with you.
Yes.
It's good to bring an advocate with you, somebody who knows the concerns for your child.
And then again, if you can't get an advocate though, for some reason, because I know cost is sometimes a concern for people,
Mm,
bring a friend or somebody who you trust to be there with you. Because if it doesn't always have to be an advocate, it's great if you can, but I would always just bring somebody else with you who's
mm,
if you have a partner, if you have a best friend, if you have,
mm,
somebody. I think it's just good to have another set of ears because they'll remember something you maybe forgot.
mm.
Some states allow you to record the meetings. So if you can record the IEP meeting, that's a great strategy too, because then you can listen again later.
And what kind of questions would you say parents should ask at these meetings?
So it kind of depends on what you're looking for, but I think that a lot of times, one of the things that I always focus on is opportunities for inclusion. So, opportunities for allowing your child to be as included with neurotypical children or non disabled children, making sure that you ask about this. So, how will my child be spending time with non disabled children, with their peers, right?
Mm,
And it depends what kind of a placement they're in. If they're in a general education class already, then that question wouldn't be as relevant. But I think that's the first one. And then if they're getting services like occupational therapy, speech and language, can these services be provided in the classroom rather than always having them pulled out of the classroom, right? Because
mm,
occupational therapy, we talk a lot about like sometimes it's related to sensory needs, like, sound or stimulation too much that may be impacting them, or maybe it's handwriting. So can that be provided in the classroom, right? Can it be provided while they're doing their work so they're not missing class? Same thing with speech and language. Maybe they're working on
mm,
pragmatics, which help them to initiate conversations with peers or respond. So, can it happen in the sort of quote unquote natural environment? Can it happen when they're in class with their peers?
mm,
So I would say how much of what they're receiving, how much of their services can be provided in the general education setting along with their neurotypical peers.
mm.
That would always be a question that I would ask. And then
Okay.
the other question is, how will I know that they're receiving these services? So, will I be getting logs? Will I be getting communication home? And if I will not, can we? So, can we get a monthly or weekly communication home, right? Whatever you're comfortable with, but some sort of a regular report home so you know, particularly if you have a child who is non speaking or unreliably speaking, verbally speaking, right? So, because you want to know. You want to know how you're going to understand what's going on for your child
Mm,
during your child's day. And then the other question, and there are a lot of questions, by the way, but I would say for the purposes of not giving you 100 questions, I would say the third question that I would offer is what kind of data and information will you be gathering to know if my child is making progress? So,
okay.
how will it be observation? Are there assessments? Is it the work? And there can be a number of different ways of collecting data. It doesn't always have to be a test, right? And that's okay. We don't actually even want that all the time. But I do want to know as a parent, what are you looking at to know that my child is making progress, even if it's just a little tiny bit of progress, right?
Yeah.
So those are three,
Mm.
I think, good questions to sort of that you can pretty much ask in every kind of a case, unless the child is already in a general education class. But if they are, then you can still talk about where their services are going to be delivered, where the
Mm.
language and speech is going to be delivered, where the occupational therapy will be delivered.
I'm quite interested in what you said about parents should ask about whether they can get in-house occupational therapy, and is that something you get readily in the States?
Yes.
Okay.
So is that not common in the UK?
So it's very hard. It's very difficult to get referrals to therapists accepted, except there's a threshold for, you know, children being accepted into these services. And if a child is in, say, what we call moderate learning difficulties school, disability school, they don't have in-house speech and language therapy and occupational therapy. So they don't have them in-house. They don't get them. It's very, very rare to get them. They're just a rare, rare breed. So
Oh, that's
it's
interesting.
very rare to get these services here. So I think in the UK, we will find it hard for them to have that okayed for them. It's something we wish we had,
Yeah.
because if you think about all the challenges that the children go through,
Yep.
sensory issues and
Right.
lots of difficulties, it would be ideal to have that easily accessible to the children.
That's
But
really
the
interesting.
yeah,
That's it's because I have a friend and a friend and I have been sort of thinking about, is there somewhere, because we keep thinking about all the things that are wrong with our schools in the US, and we keep thinking, is it being done better somewhere else?
yeah, we
And I
we
think
have the same we have
we all
challenges.
have our challenge, right? Because in the US, the academic portion is pretty terrible, right? Like our kids aren't learning, any kid really. I mean, some kids are doing okay, but our kids with disabilities, the reason most families who have a child with a disability will continue to go to our publicly funded schools is because of what I just mentioned, which is all of the therapies that are available, right? So
Really,
my son gets occupational therapy. He also gets time in a clinic for occupational therapy. So he has regular OT that happens during his day, and then he has an extra hour weekly where he gets clinic time. And then he also has speech and language, and he also has physical therapy. And it's all part of his time in school. And he's in a regular public school.
really,
And so, right?
that
And
was
so
really, yeah,
it's wonderful. In the academics, everyone has different opinions on academics, and it depends on your child, how and what school they're at, and
yeah,
how much they're learning. But the therapies for kids with disabilities, you won't get a better option, right? Or a more cost-effective option, I suppose I should say.
yeah,
Again, it all depends on what school you're at and who your therapist is, and how sort of quote unquote
mm,
good it is or how effective it is.
mm,
But it's still so much better than having to also get it all outside of school, right? So it is, especially when they're little. My son started public school when he was 3. He's going to be 5, so he's had this for 2 years at public school. And that is the best time, as you know, to get it when they're really little. So our schools
So
are
when you
far.
say public schools, because we use the terminologies differently
Yeah.
across, so when you say public schools in the US, what are you referring to?
So it's our free system of school basically, and it's a school that everyone sort of goes to. Everyone has a
Okay.
neighborhood school, and that's our neighborhood school that we're sort of zoned for, if you will, based on our zip code, based on where we live. That is the school that my son goes to. Sometimes if they're recommended for a different program, like there's some programs based on your disability where you might be recommended for a smaller classroom, like a segregated classroom that we would call it, based on
Yeah.
disability status, and that could be at a different school because not all schools have those, and you could go there. We call them non-public schools, but they're
Mm.
basically a special ed school. So we have those as well, but we don't make those recommendations very commonly unless a child really needs them.
Okay, so most children would be within the mainstream public schools.
Yeah. So, and then within those schools, we have what we call general ed classes, which are a mix of kids without disabilities and kids with disabilities. And then we have some of the schools also have smaller classrooms
Units
that
and
are
yeah,
just kids with disabilities. So they would
yeah,
be maybe 10 to 12 students.
yeah.
but then most of the classes are closer to 20 to 22, and some of the upper grades are more like 30 to 35.
Okay.
And then
So here in the UK, we've got the mainstream school, and then what's your public schools, and then we've got specialist school. So the special schools, we've got the ones for children with moderate learning disability, and we've got the ones for children with severe learning disability. And then we've got some schools for children with social and emotional needs, and some schools for children with more physical disabilities. But you have to meet a threshold before you get into the school.
got it.
So a lot of children are still in the mainstream schools with their needs.
See, most families want their kids to go to a specialist school, like one of the learning disability schools, or where do
Yeah,
you want their kids to go?
it always depends. So if a child has, so what the government does is they give you something called an educational healthcare plan if the child is felt to have significant needs.
Okay.
And with that, it's statutory that they have to provide for the child at school. So some children may have speech and language therapy written into that, but they're just for specific children. Now, the schools would keep you, and the government wants them to be there until it's deemed that they can't access education in that school placement, then they move schools.
Got it.
But what some families know is that some families request for the special schools because they can see their child is not learning even in that setting. And as you said, sometimes it's very difficult to know what your child is accessing
Right.
or being given in those mainstream schools. So parents are told, okay, your child will have X, Y, Z, but the child's not making progress and they can't tell whether the child is receiving what is meant to be delivered to them.
Got it.
And so they've seen that in a smaller placement with the teachers more aware of these needs and
Fewer
smaller
students.
class ratios and less emphasis on text and academic, but more functional life skill pathway. A lot of parents do request for the special schools, but they have to go through the panel and the government
Got it.
panels to be able to say whether they agree that the child should go to a special school. So it can be a difficult process
Yeah.
for families.
So it seems fairly similar to ours, except that they're in separate locations
Yeah.
and the government gets involved.
Yes, so the government is involved on so we have, what we call local authorities responsible for different areas, and they dictate what goes on in that area in terms of the educational systems and things.
Oh,
So
so interesting.
it's so interesting when you look across the border. We're dealing with the same children, but completely.
That's the thing, nobody's happy. That's the one thing I found in common is that everyone feels like it all needs to be changed and reformed,
Yeah,
and all families are struggling to make sure their kids are getting what they need. That's the one thing
yeah,
that's definitely a common thread
it is definitely,
across
definitely.
my country and across all of our countries, right? Like,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
world, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, I'm constantly getting parents coming, being unhappy about school. It's
Yeah.
a constant thing in my consultations that the full clinic, I will have at least over 50% of parents being
Oh,
concerned about child not getting this about school. You just wish you could sort it for them.
I know, it's
Yeah.
so hard. That's the thing, you wanna be able to solve the problem, and
Yeah.
it's at least as of right now, it's unsolvable.
I know. But I think that's where discussions like this is
Yes.
helpful because even by parents writing things down, looking for somebody to go with them to these meetings and knowing their rights, those three things we've
Yeah.
talked about is already quite something that parents can say, okay, they will be able to do something and go to the schools with different kind of pathway and information.
I do think it helps to feel like you're not alone. I think that always helps even if we can't find
Yeah.
a way to cure it all.
Exactly. So what do you consider um and I'm sure you've seen this in your practice and experience. What do you consider to be a healthy parent school partnership? What should that look like?
So I think there has to be a little bit of compromise on both sides, unfortunately, right? So I think that the school has
Yeah.
to listen to parents because I think a lot of times parents will get branded as the crazy parent or the parent who asks for too much. It happens so often, and I started working really hard to say, listen, they want something different than we want. When I was still working in a school, we just disagree. Like, we just are disagreeing on what is best for the child. That's what I started trying
Yeah.
really hard to teach my teams to say. And then I think on the parent side, the hardest thing to ask parents to do is to have patience. But
Mm.
I think that's all they have to do. They don't have to change what they're asking for. They just have to have a little patience and maybe a little bit of, again, a little bit of compromise. We'll get there and the schools will be able to do something to help their child. It may look a little different than what they're asking for, but I think they have to have a little patience and schools just have to listen, honestly. If they would listen to parents instead of shutting them down. So
Yeah.
that's what a healthy relationship looks like, or a healthy partnership looks like, is just some understanding on both sides, patience on the school and patience on the parent side. Like everyone just needs to listen, honestly.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's like everyone. What would be your advice for parents who've had difficulty? And it's quite normal when parents are frustrated about
Yes.
what's going on, and they just feel
Yeah.
really fed up.
Yeah.
Lots of families have had to stop going to work
Yep.
because the child can't cope in the school,
Yep.
or because the school is saying we can't meet the needs of your child, and they've not been able to find an alternative placement, and parents have had to stop work
Yeah.
to stay at home and homeschool the child. And because of that, they get very frustrated in difficult relationships. And so, how can families manage that? How can they reset after a difficult experience with the school?
So I think that's probably the hardest thing to do. If you already have a bad relationship or if it's already sort of soured, I think that's absolutely the most difficult thing to do. So I think
Mm,
one of the best things to do is to, if you can talk to somebody different, I think that's good. If you can bring someone else in, the person, whoever you have, because typically the relationship, it's not bad with the whole school, right? It's not bad with the whole district or the whole, you know, whoever you're working with. It's usually bad with one person or two people.
mm,
So if you can ask to communicate with somebody else, usually, listen, I'm so sorry. This has been really difficult. Is it possible that I communicate with somebody different? Right. That usually will work because resetting with the person who it's been a challenge with is usually pretty hard because it's not like your friends or your family. It's not because you can reset with friends or family pretty easily, but you don't
mm,
have that kind of a relationship. The other person that you're communicating with is doing this for a job. So they're not, as much
yeah,
as I love to think that they're going to welcome you with open arms, and some of them will, right? Like but it just, you don't know who you've got on the other end. So I think that's one thing you can do. You can also ask for, depending on where you are, what type of arrangement the district or school or whoever you're working with, you may be able to get a mediator or like a facilitated IEP. Sometimes they can bring someone from the outside in to help be like an impartial party.
mm,
And that I find to be helpful. The other thing you can do is, again, get somebody like an advocate or someone to come in and help. And
mm,
they're just there again to kind of watch and make sure that things don't go south. And I think, again, it just depends because someone said to me one time, why aren't you mad at the way they spoke to you? And I was like, because they weren't speaking to me. They
mm,
were advocating for their child.
mm.
So they may have been mad about what I said or did, but they weren't mad at me, Diana. They were mad at me, school district, or
The system.
me, director, or me, like the email that I sent. And they're advocating for their kid. I'm not going to get mad at them for that. So they may be mad at me, but I'm not mad at them. So I can talk to them all day long. If they don't want to talk to me, I'll get them someone else. But
Mm,
they can yell at me as much as they want. So that's why I'm saying it depends who's on the other side, how bad the relationship gets. And it never bothered me. Like, I felt for the parent who was upset about the decision or upset about the thing that happened, but I
mm,
never took it personally.
yeah,
I always felt bad if I had to say no to something, but also I tried really hard to be transparent. So it's all about the delivery. It's all about, like, I would never say yes and then change my answer to no. So it's really all
yeah,
how you communicate with somebody. So it's hard to rebuild relationships, but I think that parents are entitled to ask for what they want. So if you feel like you can't trust the person you're communicating with from the school, ask for somebody different. You don't have to rebuild that relationship because they're not your friends, they're not your family. You can be
mm,
kind about it and say, "Is there someone else I can communicate with?" I really want to get the best for my child, and I'm not sure that I can talk to this person. That's okay.
And what other advice do you have for families who obviously going through these frustrations? How do they manage their, or how can they manage their emotions? You know, sometimes I had to say that to parents of children. I know it can be very frustrating, but try to separate the
Yeah,
emotional
it's
part from
hard. I mean,
it's very hard.
I think that the best thing you can do is make sure that you have a support system outside in your own life. And even if it's only one other person, even and if your home is you and your child and your partner, or even if it's no partner and it's just you, make sure you have somebody you can talk to, whether it's a therapist, a friend, a family member.
Mm,
Make sure there's somebody you could talk to, because this can be all consuming. And
yeah.
it also depends on how you process things. Like, some people can be upset and then leave it. Some people can't. Like, some people it sticks with you. Like, I'm one of those people. Like, I something bad would happen at work and it would stick with me for weeks. Like, it would sit with me. No, and so I needed to talk to people about it. My poor mom has heard like every bad thing, every decision I've ever made that I felt like bad about. And not that I could have changed it. I just felt like it stuck
That
with
you
me.
needed to say, yeah.
So my processing, my mom. Thank you, mom. But so make sure there's somebody that you can talk to, or if it's exercise, or if it's, listening to music. Make sure you have something that,
Mm,
because I think some people can compartmentalize, some people can separate. When it's your kid, it's a little harder, um, to
mm,
to separate, because it's just is.
yeah.
So I would say just make sure you have healthy ways of coping, make sure your way of coping isn't like, having a glass of wine is fine, having 10, not so much. Like, figure out your
I
healthy
think
way of coping.
that's something that keeps coming up again and again, that parents need to find that outlet, the support
Yeah.
system, because dealing with all the services that your child needs, the school, and every other thing that goes with it can be very
It's a lot.
very hard for parents. So I've had parents who have felt the frustration with school because they're always being called out. They're always being told you need to come and pick your child. We can't
Yeah.
cope. And then they expel or suspend them or
Mhm.
exclude them, which I don't agree with at all. I don't believe any school should be suspending or excluding any child because they're, they're in an environment where they should be learning. Where are you excluding them to?
Exactly.
And families find that quite frustrating.
Well, because it affects everyone. It doesn't just affect the child and take them out of their learning. It affects then the family, and the family has to come get them. And then it creates
Yeah,
this whole vicious cycle of,
yeah.
yeah, it's bad.
Thank you. What would be your advice to families when how to spot when things are not going right and how this can be escalated and when to escalate their
Like their
concern?
concerns, like when things are.
Yeah.
So I think you sort of, ideally, you will be able to find someone that you can work with at your child's school, right? Ideally, that's like the best case scenario, where even though you may be struggling or your child may be struggling, there's hopefully someone you're able to work with at the school. But
Mm,
if you've sort of made repeated attempts and you've documented things, meaning you're sending an email in writing, you're sort of like sending things and following up in writing, but you're either not seeing progress from your child, or you're not seeing a positive response, or maybe no responses at all from the school, right? That you get stuck in two ways, I think, with your child.
mm,
You feel like your child's not progressing and the school's not listening, or your school's not even communicating with you, right? That those are kind of, I think, places where parents get stuck and you're like, I just want to talk to you, and they're not
mm,
communicating. I think that's when you start to escalate. And I think, depending the type of school you're in, there's typically someone that you usually communicate with, which is like the special ed teacher or the case
mm,
manager. And then they typically have a supervisor, which is either the principal of the school, the director. There's somebody that you typically go to. And so I think you just start copying more people, right? Like, And that's why you always want to have the written documentation, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I've sent 6 emails on these dates, I made a phone call on these dates, and to this
Mm-hmm.
not heard anything, and this is what's going on with my child. And always keep things matter of fact. If you can keep the emotion out of your writing, it doesn't mean you get rid of your emotion. It means your emails shouldn't be full of emotion. Like, keep
Yeah.
the curse words out, keep those inside your head. And that's when you sort of start escalating. But the truth is that that time period could be less than a month. It could be a couple of weeks. Because if something, especially if something really bad's happening, right? Like, is it lack of academic progress, or is it some really extensive sort of behavior?
Mm.
And that's where the time period matters. Like what you were talking about, if a child is being sent home and they're missing school and you're missing work, then they're being deprived of their education
Mm.
being done informally, which schools love to do. Like if they're actually being suspended, or if you're just being called to pick them up from school, schools love to do that. And they're
Yeah.
still missing their education. So
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of judge, how serious is it? If it's happened 3 times in a week, that's serious. So this could happen in a week that you escalate this.
Yeah.
Happened 3 times in a month, that's still serious, but it might take a month for you to get to that point where you're sending emails kind of once a week and waiting,
Yeah.
like, if you get a response. So, and then this kind of escalation could be different, right? Like if it's behavior, then you might want to request an additional behavior assessment. We call it an FBA in the United States, a functional behavior assessment, but in the UK, it might be something different, but a behavior assessment nonetheless. And then you're just copying more people. A lot of people in the US like to copy the Board of Education, right? They like to copy the superintendent. They like to copy, they like to get a lot of people online. So how you do it is kind of up to you. But I think
Mm.
that is what you want to do. But again, it depends on the severity. It could be a month if it's academics. It could be a week if it's behavior and your kid's not in school because they're being sent home early. So
Mm.
that's how you know, is if you're not getting a response, you're not getting support from the school, and they're not dealing with your child because they don't want to. You can
Yeah.
tell. They're like hands off. They want you to deal with
Mm.
it, but that's not how
Yeah.
it works. If they're supposed to be in school, they need to be in school, and the school needs to be reaching out to you really to say, "Hey,
Exactly.
what do you wanna do?" And so that's what I would say, like, again, it depends, every school's a little different on sort of the hierarchy of who you go to,
Mm-hmm.
but you just start copying people and you say, "This is what I need, and this is what's not happening." So the more documentation, the better, and all in writing.
Thank you so much. This is so helpful. You've really given us very good recommendations and advice for families. Sometimes you might wake up in the middle of the night, you remember something, make sure you write it down before you forget it. And when you're going to the school, if you feel you need somebody to go with you, especially if you feel that you have been trying to communicate with school and you're not really getting any input or way forward, it's good to go with an advocate. It's good to know your rights, and it's good to make sure that you know that it's not something you're pleading with, it's your right. So
100.
you should make sure that you really communicate that. And it was also to look at finding some, I think one thing you mentioned again was finding the right person in the school, somebody that you can communicate with. And if relationships have broken down with particular individuals, it doesn't mean that you can't find another person that you can communicate with, for because you have to look at it that you're advocating for your child,
Yep, 100%.
and that's the important thing, the child at the center of this.
Yeah.
And also sometimes all these processes can be quite frustrating and emotional, and sometimes that can influence the way we communicate. So it's good to make sure that when you're doing that communication, it's devoid of, the emotions. It can be hard. Because
Well,
every time you want to communicate, you're thinking about all the things that are upsetting you. So, but it's good to just keep the emotional aspect away and just deal with the facts, like you've mentioned. So, about your service, could you tell us a bit more about what you do in terms of how do parents reach out to you and how do you work with them?
So they could find me on Instagram. That's where I spend a lot of time at Disability Ed Pros. And then I have a website as well, which is disabilityedpros.com. And then I also just started a Substack. So I'll be doing some writing over there, which is my name, Diana Fannon, on Substack. So my services, I do work as an advocate. So I can go with families to IEP meetings if they need me. But I'm working on, and I'll have a course that's launching in a little over a week that is helping parents to prepare for IEP meetings and sort of do all the things even before, after IEP meetings using artificial intelligence. So that is my latest, or my first course, I guess, that I've launched, because my goal is, I know that advocates aren't always accessible for people in terms of cost. And I know it can be really expensive because, once you kind of need an advocate from age 3 up until age 21, right? The IEPs kind of never end, the meetings. And so my thinking behind launching this course was doing something that is really low cost for families, that they can learn about how to use artificial intelligence safely, and then also how to use it to help them prepare for IEP meetings and do all the things. So it talks a lot about the safety, not putting certain information in, and just teaching parents how to do that. So I'll be launching that course. And then I also do just a lot of education and training. And so I'm available for that, for speaking, going to schools, going to businesses, adults, kids. I train on everything related to neurodivergence. So that's really exciting.
Fantastic. So can people outside the US attend those courses?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, so that's good. So for our audience, if you follow Dana and get that information, like I said, the process, we're just dealing with different systems, but everything, though, as you can see from what we've talked about today, it's the same problem across. And so the same advice and practical advice, it would be useful anywhere. It's about those core principles of learning how to advocate for your child as a parent and making sure that your child is getting the service and education that they need to get. And we're going to put all Diana's resources and links on the podcast when this is released. So it'll be useful to get that information. I think that would be a really brilliant course, the one that you've just launched. So yes, it will be great. But I think many parents need it. Thank you so much. So what's your last kind of advice for families this week going through challenges? What is the one thing that you would say parents should, because there would be many listening to this who
Yeah.
have through.
My last piece of advice, and this is going to probably be surprising given what we've talked about, just try to find joy in raising your kids, because this is such a slog. Like, it is the therapies and we spend so much time every week taking our kids to therapies and reading over the IEPs and all the documents and trying to make sure they're getting everything they need. But the truth is, if they've got you as a parent and you're connecting with them and you're showing them love, you're really building so much of what they need in the house and at home. And they have that to always come back to, and they will always remember that connection. And so all of it is so important, but find that joy and find that peace that you have with your child, and just trying to be a parent, because that's where the fun is. And there should be at least moments of fun in between all of the other stuff. Because it's fun. Even when it's hard, it's still fun.
Thank you for that advice, and I completely agree.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of advice we've had over time. Is all these other things, yes, they're important, but it's your child. You're finding that space and time to be with your child and actually enjoying them and seeing a lot of them have so much strength. But
Yep.
when there's a lot of frustration from dealing with everything else, you
Yep.
sometimes miss those great moments which you could have benefited from. So thank you for that. And I'm sure many families will benefit from that.
I hope
And
so.
thank you once again for coming. We really appreciate your time with us today and sharing this wonderful information with our families.
Well, thank
Thank
you for
you.
having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.